Good morning, and this is Kathryn MacDonald, and this is session 3 of our seminars on supporting Indigenous youth using primarily dialectical behavior therapy strategies. Session 3 is going to focus on distress tolerance skills. This is me, just so that you've got a face to put with the voice. I have no pharmaceutical affiliations or other conflicts of interest, and this is Max, who keeps me in line. So the goals for this series, as you know, in session 1, we sort of looked at the context and why these skills might be helpful and a bit of a framework for looking at this issue. And in session 2, we started looking at mindfulness. And mindfulness is really a very important foundation for all of these skills. And so it's something that probably we should all be practicing on some level, but certainly something that is helpful for our youth. And then today we're going to focus more on distress tolerance, which is very important skills that many people, both ourselves and our clients, don't always have in the amount that we need them. So again, just in general about the series, the origins of these skills are not in First Nations culture, but there are ways that we can integrate tradition with some of these ideas. And when we've done the series and we're having more discussion, I'm going to talk to you more about ways that we can do this. Again, I'm not suggesting that these skills are a cure for suicide, and I know that that's a primary focus for many of you in the North. But what we do want to do is increase the coping strategies for all youth for those times when they feel hopeless and frustrated or in acute distress, so that they don't impulsively jump to suicide as a way of coping. Keeping our youth safe and secure, those are priorities for all of us. So when you do have a youth who's presenting with suicidal ideation, it's very important to get a full assessment to ensure their safety. So these skills in DBT are often helpful with people with chronic suicidal ideation and self-harm, but when there is an acute problem, it's very important to get services. So many of these skills are part of or can be built into healthy activities, like I said in the previous session. So we look at mindfulness as being part of prayer and contemplation of various types, being in and with the natural world, walking, hiking, drumming, singing, dancing, smudging. All of these are things that can be worked into mindfulness strategies, but also into distress tolerance and emotional regulation, as we're going to talk about in the next 2 sessions. But are also just plain part of a good, healthy life. And so anything that we can do to promote wellness in our youth is important. Again, I'm not able to provide all the possible cultural and spiritual connections, but I would suggest that if there are people in the community with whom you can share these ideas, they might have suggestions on ways that culture might be integrated in that community. As I said, I will put some ideas out there, but I think every community is different. And one of the goals that we have is to try and connect youth to their culture and to help them soothe their discomfort using healthy rather than unhealthy experiences and strategies, and developing that feeling of belonging and also eventually being able to give back to communities is all part of healthy living and giving kids a reason to keep living. So I'm just going to do a brief review of session 2, which was the introduction to dialectical behavior therapy and mindfulness. And just to remind you that this is a really excellent manual. Now, this is designed for use in groups, and the evidence is actually for dialectical behavior therapy as a complete year-long therapy, and for the DBT skills group, which is a shorter group. But the skills themselves are very useful, and I think will be helpful for you in day-to-day situations. But if you have the chance to get this manual and read through it and learn some of these skills and practice them in your own life as well as sharing them with your clients, I think that you'll find that they're very helpful. So again, all of this really, the fundamental foundation of all of this is the mindfulness, so that being self-aware and in the present, acceptance, monitoring your emotion without reacting, and focusing your paying attention to focus and attention to what's going on around you without reacting. And then in no particular order, these other four aspects, so distress tolerance that we're going to talk about today, emotion regulation that we're going to talk about next time, and then interpersonal effectiveness and walking the middle path, which will be the session following, are all built on mindfulness. And when the groups are done, they're not necessarily done in this order. People can join at different times, but always it comes back to the mindfulness. In session 2, we reviewed the impact of history on culture and people, and reviewed the importance of things like finding strengths and developing goals and connections for people to their communities and to each other and to their cultures. We also reviewed the importance of safety planning and developing a detailed crisis plan, and we'll talk about this more today. We reviewed the goals of dialectical behavior coping skills, and we looked at the concept of dialectics, so this idea that two things can be ideas that are opposed, but they can both be true. And then we went through the idea of mindfulness. We looked at the importance of culture and spirituality and about finding out about every client's individual beliefs and interests and not making assumptions about their beliefs and interests. We looked at the role of culture, tradition, and spirituality in the sense of connection and belonging. And we looked at traditional beliefs as a framework for a healthy and structured and secure life. We also looked at the lasting impact of the residential schools on the communities and the whole concept of intergenerational trauma. Areas of focus in DBT skills, as I just talked about, are the distress tolerance, interpersonal effectiveness, emotion regulation, and walking the middle path. And when we spent time on the last session, we talked mainly about mindfulness, which teaches us to be aware and to take control of our world, both our internal world and our external world, differently by paying attention to the experience we're having at the present time and using intentional control and change. So the awareness of thoughts and feelings and behaviors and the things that drive us allows for better emotional regulation. And so constantly being aware of what we're doing and what we're experiencing helps us to make better choices when we become distressed. So one of the most difficult aspects of this is learning to monitor emotion without reacting. And this is where some of those breathing skills and other mindfulness skills were helpful. We talked about the concept of wise mind, which Marshall Linehan saw as the healthy way of combining our reasoning mind, which is all logic and fact, and our emotional mind, which reacts without thinking, and pulling those things together to balance reason and emotion. What we know is that when people are distressed, they're very frequently not aware of what's happening to them emotionally, and we'll talk about this more today. When that flood of feeling takes control, the sole goal becomes releasing the tension and distress, hence the need to look at distress tolerance and emotion regulation in the next two sessions. That idea that people act before they think often causes them problems because the behaviors are not things that they would do if they were thinking more clearly. Mindfulness requires us to focus on our internal experience, so looking at our thoughts and our emotions and the physical urges and feelings, but staying fully present and focused on that without judging it or eliminating it, but also without acting on it. So we reviewed strategies for helping youth to use that focus and control as they're looking at feelings and reactions. The strategies and exercises from DBT that we reviewed included guided meditation, 3 states of mind, the mindfulness what skills, so observing, describing, participating, and then the mindfulness how skills, so don't judge, just focus. And I suggested that your homework was to go into practice those skills yourself. So I don't know whether you did practice those skills yourselves, but if you did, I hope that you found them helpful. And I think that you'll find that the skills that we're going to continue to review in the next 4 sessions will also be helpful. So one of the things that's really important is teaching people that concept of responsibility for themselves. So this is another idea that we're going to come back to that we sort of started in a different form last time, but we'll talk about again in the next couple of sessions, is that even if you did not cause your problems, what you do about them and your reactions and actions now are your responsibility. So when you have a problem that needs to be resolved, you have several options. You can find a solution to the problem. If there is no solution, you can choose to look at it in a different way. You can choose to accept it and let it go. You can choose to accept it and be upset about it and just stay upset, or you can choose to escalate the problem. But one of those things is going to be what you end up choosing to do about any given problem situation. Obviously, the best solution or the best option is to find a solution to the problem, but that's not always possible. But if you can either find a solution or look at it in a different way or accept it and let it go, the consequences for yourself and probably for other people are not so bad. If you accept it and are upset, that will leave consequences for you and possibly for other people. But if you escalate the problem, we can be absolutely certain that there are going to be problems for both you and the people around you. So we're going to talk today about distress tolerance. So in DBT skills training, there are just some general things that are important. And I know that this is going to be more difficult for nurses in the North because you don't often get to see people on a regular basis. But if there's any way of working at engaging youth to come in and see you a bit more regularly to work on these skills, that's going to be really beneficial and ultimately is going to be much better for them in terms of building resiliency. So engagement is a big part of the process, and they need to feel that they can trust you and that you're actually engaging with them and understand what they're going through to some extent. These are situations where it's not unreasonable to engage them by using examples, not terribly personal examples, but examples that adults can relate to that are similar to things going on in the youth's life, for example, or just talking about difficult times when you have needed to manage your own emotions. It's helpful to do that because it helps to keep them focused on the material. And I know that there are, one of the things that's difficult with teenagers is anything that requires them to, do exercises and things like that. But anything that you can do to encourage that is helpful, and the best way to do that is to find the ways to make it relevant to them. And that may mean really working through picking one thing and one thing only and finding the ways that that can be made relevant to them at that time. It's helpful if there are multiple people involved that you stay in touch. So if there's more than one nurse, or there's a nurse and a physician or a nurse and a counselor, if you also know and practice the skills regularly, that will help you to explain them in a more relevant way to the youth. And like I said, these are all skills that are helpful for all of us. And we use them better at sometimes than others. I can certainly say that from my own life. Trying to engage people both on a thinking and an emotional level is important, and helping them see both sides of it. If it's just cognitive, people don't tend to have the buy-in. The emotion is what makes us really buy in, and your passion about the teaching it may be helpful. And again, I recognize that this isn't going to be like a group, although ideally that would be great, but I know that that's not feasible for most of you. Again, the core basis of this is focus on balancing acceptance and change, and that's the dialectic that we talked about last time, that I can be good enough but still need to do things to work on myself. So again, while DBT is usually done in groups, and that's less likely to happen in your settings because you're in a clinic and you've got less frequent follow-up and there's less family involvement, the skills can still be taught and used. The evidence isn't as clear. Emergency departments, however, certainly in the South, are using distress tolerance and emotional regulation and other mindfulness skills for kids who come into the emergency rooms with suicidal ideation. And so this is not an unreasonable approach. So again, we're going to look at ways that you can get kids engaged. And one of the things that's really important with youth is that they need to feel that you're listening. And there are different levels of what we call validation. So there are a variety of approaches that can be used. So one of them is just listening and watching, even without that sort of feedback, but letting kids know that you're actually listening to them. When you're listening, you can also reflect back to them some of their ideas. So paraphrasing your understanding of what they've said so that they can tell you whether or not you've got it right. And this serves the dual purpose of making sure that you do truly understand what they're saying, but also letting them know that you've heard them. Reflecting nonverbal communication. So when you see them looking upset, it's not unreasonable to say, it looks like that's a really difficult thing for you to talk about. Noticing their emotional communication lets them know, again, that you're paying attention, but also helps them understand that people can understand some things without having to be told explicitly. Acknowledging the links between their current experience and things that they've learned in the past or past experiences can be important. So, for example, if someone has hurt their feelings now, and there have been times that they have been abandoned or hurt in the past by people who are important to them, like parents or aunts, uncles, cousins, other friends, that can be really important to reflect that some of what they're experiencing in the current situation may also be related to those past experiences. And then also acknowledging what the context is, and that sometimes it's, even though the way they're behaving may not be ideal and may not be what their goal should be, that there is a reason that they are responding that way. The other thing that's really important, and I see this as being particularly important in teens, is that they need to feel that you're treating them like a person, that you're not talking down to them, that you're not just another adult who doesn't really get it. And one way is to just treat them as an equal and treat them as capable of managing their own lives, because many of the kids that we see have been managing their own lives since they were very, very young. And that's part of the reason that their skills have developed in a way that have not been ideal for them. A focus on problem solving is really important, and helping people develop new skills can be a challenge, but very, very vital to improving things. So being able to reflect the struggles that they're having and support self-soothing strategies, helping them come up with alternative ideas. So identifying what the problem actually is and what are the different alternatives that might actually solve the problem. So what solutions are possible? And then, so some people may be able to come up with 4 or 5 different potential solutions, and some people may not come up with any. And so part of our job is to help people to find alternative strategies or behaviors. Encouraging people to practice problem-solving skills and helping them figure out what works best for them. I'm going to present a lot of different skills today in distress tolerance. Not all of them will work for every person, and so part of the goal is to explore the different options with people so that they can find what works with them and have kind of a grab bag of alternatives that they can use. So one of the things that we hear a lot from teenagers is, why, what's the point? Why bother trying to cope? And these are really common questions from youth who don't see a way out of their struggles. So Marshall Linehan, who developed dialectical behavior therapy, basically is pretty blunt about this and says it's important to learn to cope because pain is part of life and you're never going to be able to get away from all pain. We'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. And if you can't cope with that pain, you may do things impulsively that have negative consequences. And in the long run, even though you've acted, you're still not going to get what you want, but you're then having to deal with the negative consequences of your actions. So this actually is the pros and cons exercise that they actually present later on, but I actually think it's a really big part of the problem-solving process, and so I've moved it a little bit further up because I think that being able to look at the pros and cons and how have people done things in the past and what are new alternatives are really, that's a really fundamental part of problem-solving. So in this exercise, you actually look at, okay, well, let's look at what does the problem behavior, so say that's damaging things, punching holes in walls. How does the problem behavior help you? So that there are many ways that that does help. It releases energy. It gives people a sense of satisfaction, even if it's in a negative way. But then you need to look at, okay, so what are the problems that are caused by that behavior? And then looking at the short-term and the long-term effects of both the pros and the cons, and then looking at the pattern over time of the impact it has on your life, and exploring the benefits of looking at controlling the urge in the short term in order to get better long-term outcomes. So dialectical strategies are ways of teaching and modeling with clients in the moment. So actually playing devil's advocate at times and sort of deliberately presenting opposing ideas in order to evoke discussion. Sometimes it's helpful if you warn youth that you might do that at times as you're working with them, just so that they know that you're not just being difficult with them. But when they do get angry when you present an opposing viewpoint, that's a good opportunity to work through some of the distress tolerance and emotion regulation strategies in the moment. And so those things are actually really important experiences for people to have. The other thing is in the moment, using your ability to model strategies to do things like finding the positive and the negative. So making lemonade, when life hands you lemons, make lemonade kind of ideas. And there are many, many examples that I'm sure all of you can think of where this is possible. It's not necessarily an easy thing when people are struggling and have very difficult life situations. And often they haven't had a lot of opportunities to do that sort of sense of finding the positive. Often clients will present as being very black and white. So that black and white thinking is a huge part of the struggle that people tend to have. And it's either this way or it's that way and there are no other options, or it's this way and there's no other option. And so helping people see other alternatives is really important. And sometimes helping people see the validity of both sides. And this can certainly be the case in situations where there are difficulties in relationships and that kind of thing. And often if you are seen as taking the other side, that will evoke significant emotion in clients, and then you have to use the strategies in order to de-escalate things. So the goal in distress tolerance is obviously to help people tolerate the discomfort until problems can be addressed and resolved in a different way. So the idea of the distress tolerance skills is certainly to start as a crisis survival alternative. So what can we do in the moment to get through this moment so I don't act and do something that I'm going to regret later? So how can I manage my distress without resorting to cutting myself or using drugs in order to numb that discomfort? So managing the moment is a big piece of that skill. And then reality acceptance. So I brought up the serenity prayer in the previous webinar, that, grant me the wisdom to accept the things I cannot change and the wisdom to know the difference. I haven't given you the whole thing, but the whole idea of accepting the things you cannot change is a very important part of life. That the reality is there's some things that you might not like, but you can't do anything about it. So developing the crisis survival skills. Crisis survival skills are a group of strategies that really have a focus on helping you to tolerate the current distress without making things worse. So again, back to that problem solving that I was talking about. And all of these skills provide concrete actions that they can use instead of engaging in self-harm or substance abuse and then suffering the negative consequences of those. So I'm going to go through these, and you'll see that they can be helpful, but this is the list of them, and I'm going to go through them one by one. The goal of going through all of these, again, is to create a kind of a grab bag of possibilities, what works for an individual person that they can write down or keep the sheets for, or basically have some other reminder so that they can use them in times of crisis. The idea is to look at changing the experience of the distress, so decreasing the distress through distraction or through healthy self-soothing or through changing what they're experiencing right at that time, and by managing the impulsivity, and then sometimes by actually using our body chemistry to decrease arousal, and those are the tip skills that I'll talk about in a minute. So these are short-term management of crisis situations, and the goal of this is to reduce maladaptive behavior. So some crisis survival skills might be things like distraction. So if it's someone who likes puzzles, there are lots and lots of puzzles like Sudokus and crosswords and word jumbles and word searches that are available for download from the internet. And those you can have a stack of those in your offices to hand to people. There's also lots of adult coloring now available for download. So if you have some colored pencils anywhere, or even crayons, it's amazing how many adults find this soothing. Humor, so short video clips, images, anything that makes people laugh. Those are all really good distractions. And then there's soothing strategies like music, images, text, textures, scents, all of those things. And then the tip strategies that I talked about, and I'm going to go into more detail, are things like using shocking temperature changes to actually change your body's responses. So the first one is really focusing on the distraction ideas using various means. And they call this Wise Mind Accepts. And Accepts is an acronym to help you remember the strategies. So the A is for activities, so doing something. It can be anything. Go for a hike, go for a walk, talk to a friend, play a drum, anything that helps you to get your mind away from the thing that's agitating you. Contributing is the first C, so doing something for somebody else, whether it's doing your grandmother's dishes or helping your little sister with something or taking your little brother fishing. All of those things are helping someone else and ultimately make you feel better. The second C is comparisons. So you can look at comparisons to other times in your life when things were worse, or you can compare yourself to other situations. I find this is a bit of a dicey one if you've got someone who's feeling really low, because sometimes they can't think of anything that is worse. So you may want to find other alternatives for this other C. Emotions is the E, so changing your emotions. So if you like to listen to music, if listening to happy songs makes you feel better, or if drawing makes you feel better, that's helpful. So any kind of thing that will help with your emotions. Talking to a friend might help with emotions. Singing might help with emotions. Creating music. Dancing is one that will often help with emotions. Pushing things away, so temporarily distracting yourself from the thought just by doing something busy work. The T is thoughts, so changing your thoughts using reading or art or songs. Again, like the emotional changes, using these strategies can take our minds away from the things that are distressing us. And then sensations, so if you're feeling sad, using other senses to change the way you're feeling and change the focus. So whether that's listening or tasting something, or going for a run to speed up the other sensations in your body. The idea of running and putting out energy in a healthy way can be helpful. This is the handout that they have for in the book for Wise Mind for Accepts, and this gives some other ideas. The one thing I find about the handouts in the book, and I will be actually working on a manual that I can send up to you that is a little bit more applicable for smaller and more remote communities, is a lot of these are very dependent on either living in an urban area or having a lot of things that your clients may not have. And obviously it doesn't have any of those cultural aspects. So we will be working on a manual that ideally I'll be able to send you at some point in the fall. This is an exercise to help people if it's someone who's able to actually write things down and you think that that would be helpful. There's a way that they can actually write down suggestions for themselves and then be able to remember this at times that you're not around to help them work through it. Once they've tried those things, they can actually write down a sort of a list of whether it helped or not, or whether it didn't help, and then you can come up with other ideas for times that it's not helping. One of the big things that we can do is self-soothing and using other senses to self-soothe. So if you're feeling distressed, focusing on things that you can see. So we call this just 6 things usually, or 6 senses. Look around you in the immediate moment at what are the things that you can look at. What's happening in the trees? Is there an animal close by? Is there somebody doing something close by that you could watch? Hearing, so you can hear yourself, so you can sing, or you can listen to music, you can listen to the sounds of nature. You can employ scent, so smelling hand lotion or flowers or coffee or food, or just the fresh air. Things that you can taste, so small amounts, so not eating big amounts of food, but more small amounts that you can taste, so a little piece of something that you can taste. Physical sensations, like could you have a bath, could you go for a swim, could you pat a dog or a cat, could you put a cold cloth over your face to just change the way that feels. And then movement, so you can run, can you rock in your chair, can you stretch, can you dance. All of these are very helpful with distress tolerance. Again, this is just a handout in the book if you choose to use it. And another exercise that can be used to help people figure out what is helpful for them. I would say that you may want to use these for yourself as you're talking to people to keep track of what has been helpful for them in the past. So even if they don't want to do this and carry it with them, the next time they come in, you'll have an idea of what's worked in the past and what hasn't. So you can use it like a progress note. The next skill is called improve the moment. So using imagery, and this again goes back to some of that mindfulness stuff and the relaxation exercises that we've talked about in the past. So using calm, relaxing, and safe images to help feel better in the moment. Finding meaning in things. So what's the purpose of what's going on? And this can be a really challenging one. But is there any value in the pain that they're feeling now, and is there something that they can learn from it? Prayer can be helpful to whatever is their source of comfort, so Creator, God, whatever power they find helpful. And then the whole idea of wise mind, just prayer to your own mind to seek wisdom from your own knowledge and understanding. Relaxation is the R's in improve, so progressive muscle relaxation or getting a massage from a friend if that's possible, having a bath if that's possible. Having one thing in the moment, so just instead of all of the things that are running through someone's head, being able to focus on that one thing, whether it's a rock on the ground or a cloud in the sky, but bringing your mind back to that one thing in that moment can help distract you from the discomfort and help increase your distress tolerance. The V, where it says vacation, is not really a vacation like going away, which I know would not be possible for many people that you deal with, but more to be able to go for a walk. A vacation from your thoughts is really what the idea is. So go for a walk or read something or relax or play music, but taking a vacation from those thoughts that are really bothering you. And then encouragement is the E, so telling yourself positive things. And many youth really don't have a store of positive things that they can say to themselves. And this is somewhere where you as a clinician can be really helpful by providing some of those encouraging words to them. So again, this is the handout from the book, and it may or may not be helpful for you, but I think that the ideas are what's important. And again, another exercise, and again, I think that keeping this as a progress note if you don't think the youth are likely to want to engage would be helpful. So here's the pros and cons exercise that I talked about before, just helping people have really what this is about is a strategy for working through a crisis. So what's the problem that's going on? What is it that I'm feeling the urge to do about it that might not be helpful for me? And what are the pros and cons of me acting on those urges, or what are the pros and cons of resisting those urges, and what else can I do in order to manage it? Working through this in the session with someone can really, even if they don't take it with them or do it on their own, can still be a very useful exercise, because very frequently when people struggle with distress tolerance, they don't think through things at all. They have acted before they've really put any thought into what the consequences would be, or how things might turn out, or how other people might react. So even just being able to sit down and go through a situation with them, even if it's after the situation has happened, can be very helpful. And I find that often I end up doing this kind of exercise after a bad situation has happened in order to help people to see that there's benefit for them to use it the next time. So the pros and cons, they might be able to see in retrospect, they're not going to be able to see in the future until they've worked through a couple of exercises where, okay, they've broken the window because they were angry, and then there were consequences to that because it was cold in the house and other people were upset with them, that kind of thing, so that they can see what's in it for me, what's the benefit to me in learning to resist these urges. The tip skills are things to use, to help people to use when they're so angry and upset that they can't remember any of the other skills and they can't settle themselves down. So what they do is they work on the body's natural system for calming. So one of these would be the dive reflex. The kids that are seen in the emergency rooms here are constantly talking to me about the idea of ice diving, and this is something that they teach in the Emerge, that you put your face into very, very cold water, because that actually is an instinctive reaction that slows your heart rate and lowers your blood pressure, and it's really a response to the risk of drowning in cold water. But what it does do is it really helps to shift that angry, upset, anxious kind of feeling, and helps settle and helps you to think separately, think differently about it. So using the acronym TIP, T is for temperature, so if you cool your face with cold water, that's the ice diving that I was talking about. I is intense aerobic exercises, so you can go running or you can do jumping jacks, and that is also going to change your physical response to things. P is paced breathing, so box breathing, for example, for those of you who did the cognitive behavioral therapy group with me, but I believe that the relaxation exercises, the box breathing is in with the relaxation exercises that are posted on the site, and so you can look at that, but that's one form of paced breathing. The deep breathing is another. And then progressive muscle relaxation, and again, in those relaxation exercises, there's a progressive muscle relaxation there. There are also many of these on YouTube that will talk someone through muscle relaxation. So the one caveat to all of this with the TIP skills is that it's really important to make sure there are no medical contraindications, like problems with dysrhythmias that might be triggered by things like the rapid decrease in heart rate with the dive reflex. So again, this is just the book's handout for the TIP skills, and hopefully we will have an alternative for you come the fall. Again, this is to help people figure out and remember which ones work for them, and ways of actually rating the efficacy by rating the emotional arousal before and after they use the skills. So the other part of the distress tolerance strategies is the accepting reality. And so we look at things like choices, and the one exercise called choices we can make, another called turning the mind, and willingness versus willfulness, and then finally the creating the crisis survival kit. So accepting reality, when there's an upsetting situation, as I said earlier, your alternatives are to solve the problem, to change how you feel about the problem, accept it as it is, stay miserable, or make it worse. Those are essentially the alternatives that you have in any problem situation. So figuring out which of those you hope to do or want to do is the best alternative. So there are reasons, and we talked before about why bother. So pretending that isn't happening doesn't actually change what's happening. And so actually changing it requires that first you accept that it's there and that it's happening, and then working on the problem solving to make the changes. Pretending it's not there actually turns pain into something chronic, and then you end up suffering. Accepting pain just is, but focusing on that pain and suffering with it is something that you can actually avoid. So these are all strategies that can be used. Marsha Linehan talks a lot about radical acceptance, and that is that part of accepting the things that you can't change that I talked about with the Serenity Prayer. And sometimes it just means that you have to say, things are as they are and I can't change them. But that does not mean that life isn't worth living, and life can be very worthwhile even when there are painful events in it. And part of it is learning to accept reality and finding out how to make reality meaningful even when it's uncomfortable. So again, turning the mind is an exercise really in acceptance. So accepting something as a choice, like a fork in the road, as Lenahan said, and as they're saying in this handout. So you can accept or you can reject, but again, it's one of those pros and cons. What are the pros and cons of accepting versus rejecting reality, and what are the consequences in each situation? And again, there's an exercise on how to work through the acceptance process. So I think, again, many youth are not going to want to actually do this, but you can work through it with them and either keep it as a progress note for the next time they come, or you can write it out as they're talking and hand it to them as a reminder if their language is good and they're able to use that, like read through it when they need it. Another idea that they put forward in the distress tolerance section is the idea of willingness versus willfulness. The willingness is your ability to do exactly what the situation calls for and being effective in any situation. So rather than saying just an automatic no, actually doing what's needed without fighting it. And this can be a really important thing in relationships, but it's also a big part of acceptance. Willfulness, so that idea of saying no, and this can be something as straightforward as being asked to go and collect the firewood from outside and bring it into the house, for example, and a youth saying, no, why should I, not going to do it. You can certainly refuse to do all of those things, but it really is not reality-based, because eventually it needs to be done, and it's not what's needed. And you end up suffering because all of that time you spend refusing to do it and being willful is time that you could be doing something more pleasant. And sometimes just if you can describe things, describe a situation and describe a behavior as willfulness, and then just get them to change that word to willingness. So being willing to face reality, being willing to go and do what's needed, it just changes the way they look at the situation and can help them see that there is an alternative and to see that there is more to be gained sometimes by being willing than by being willful. And here again, it's just an example of a handout from the book and an exercise. So one of the most important parts of all of this is the idea of building a crisis survival kit, because we know that many of the youth we see are in a pretty chronic state of crisis. And so having, I always call it a grab bag, because that's the term I've used for years. I've used this as a strategy for many, many years with youth. And sometimes I literally give them a bag, just a plastic bag or whatever happens to be around, with ideas in it or things that they can do or things that they've brought. So sometimes it's just a squeeze ball from the dollar store or something, anything that you are able to get hold of. And this might be something that could be sent up to you if you're doing this work. Or things that you can download from the internet, like the stuff that I talked about before, the coloring exercises or the puzzles. And what you want to do is really help youth to build collections of healthy ways of managing distress. And you want to have one that's bigger, that has more in it, and one that they can carry around with them. Because, of course, a lot of the time when people are facing a crisis, they aren't where all their things are. So they can't necessarily be carrying a whistle or a harmonica to make music or whatever, although those are things that probably could be in their pockets. But they certainly wouldn't be likely to be carrying a guitar, for example. So you want one large kit that they can have where in their safe space at home, or wherever that safe space is, and then one set of strategies that they can carry around with them. One of the other things that I sometimes do is I will print out a list of things that we've come up with and laminate it on a card, so it's almost like a little business card that they can keep in a pocket, and it's just reminders of the things that have worked for them in the past. Also, just reminding them about strategies that might not be available immediately, but that they could get to. So, for example, ICE, one of the things I use for kids who cut is that because the pain is often what distracts them or changes the way they're focusing on things, and I will get them to take an ice cube, if there's an ice cube available, and squeeze it between their hands, because what it does is it creates the pain without actually damaging them. So, again, an alternative. And so that could be done with a snowball in the winter. It could be done with a piece of ice. But, again, it's a way of creating that. Now, it's not that I'm endorsing pain as the best, creating pain as the best way of managing things. But, again, in a crisis situation, what you're trying to do is resolve the situation with the least negative consequences for the individual. And so if they are going to cut, if you don't do this, then the alternative of squeezing the ice cube is actually a really good one. So again, this is the kind of sheet that I might make for people to have. And again, a lot of the examples that are given are not necessarily things that are going to be readily available, but we will change these as when we put together a manual for you guys to have to work with in your communities. And we'll have things that are more available to you in those more rural settings or more isolated settings. But just a list of anything that works, and there's one for the larger kit and one for the smaller kit, that a lot of the ideas, like the deep breathing and things like this, could be put on a small piece of card to be carried around, or in a small pouch, for example. And maybe one of the things would be to make a leather pouch that they could carry things in. So we're going to look at emotion regulation in the next session, and the distress tolerance and the emotional regulation I find very highly connected, as all of it is. I think the thing to remember again is that the mindfulness is always the core strategy and the core basis of these skills, and that when people are distressed, coming back to those mindfulness ideas and some of those using the senses and focusing on the moment and not reacting, recognizing how you're feeling and what you're thinking without actually acting on it is a very important concept. So the next session will be on emotion regulation, and we'll come back to more of these things at that time. Thank you.
All done, Kathryn?
Yeah. Did that sound